All right. So Cameron Gieda is Vice President of Business Development for Spartan Radar, and his topic today is emerging radar technologies for ADAS applications. Of course, we've heard about radar already. There was several dedicated talks to radar. Spartan Radar is a very interesting startup company, of course, focused on radar. And so we thought it'd be nice to hear from Spartan, and also, of course, a little bit about what Spartan is doing, but also their perspective on the market and what's emerging and how they see it. So, Cameron, I think everything is all set, ready to go. Again, just to remind you, you have 20 minutes total, so 15 minutes for the speaking portion and 5 minutes for Q&A.
Perfect. Perfect.
Welcome again, Cameron, and please go ahead.
Good stuff. Well, hey everybody, and thanks for the time, Mike, to tell y'all a little bit about Spartan Radar. So we're a pretty young startup. It's been since October of 2020, so we've really done a lot in a very short amount of time. In my background, I had come previously from autonomous stuff, where I held a role kind of selling many of the technologies talked about before: LiDAR, ultrasonics, sold a lot of different radar systems as well, and cameras. So decided to go to Spartan for some reasons I'll get into here in a little bit, but really because it was a software play. We really leverage software capabilities more than physics in most cases, and that's kind of the guiding light. So here's some kind of theoretical things. Everybody's seen this sort of image of the fans of different perception sensors spread around a vehicle. And really what we're trying to do is, using Spartan software, improve upon existing perception suites. And to do that today, we're not waiting for L4, L5 or robotaxis to become ubiquitous. We're going after things like AEB, and adaptive cruise that we can basically try to make a little bit of money on today. Being a software play, we can actually adapt to basically any radar front end, any bit of silicon. So it really makes for a win-win as far as implementation. So what are we looking to do? We're in the radar business. We want to make radar more accurate. Having kind of gone through the arc of capabilities with companies like Velodyne and SICK, it seems like radar is a fantastic modality. It just needs to be adapted to the resolutions and the ranges really required by automotive. So we are looking to obviously improve resolution, improve response time on radar, but while at the same time deliver something that's cost effective. We're adding a little bit of software to an existing radar. It isn't a very expensive proposition. And all of this manifests in, when you remove latency from radar and improve resolution, it starts improving systems that we use every day. And I'll give you some examples here. So AEB is already somewhat ubiquitous. There's many cars, especially looking at Hyundai, Subaru and others, that it's just about a standard feature at this point in time. It works good. It has reduced the fatality risk massively, and there's obviously still room for improvement, but we're interested in this technology because it's already seeing a great rate of adoption, and improving upon it just makes a lot of more sense. So as you can see on these metrics here, cars with AEB systems are obviously far less likely to collide with pedestrians, just because it is looking always when you might not be. These systems today might use a little bit of the radar input, but basically they're camera based. And as Dave brought up in the previous talk, cameras have trouble in certain situations. So, and this kind of illuminates where we are today with these types of systems, the Mobileye system that Ford uses and others. And you can see that the risks reduction based on different situations, lighting conditions, speed, and as well as, of course, dust and other things like that. But what we're kind of articulating here is that obviously you don't necessarily need to avoid an accident to cause less harm. You can even just slow down the vehicle enough, which results in a far less severe accident, lower cost, lower injury. But ultimately, we want to reach a state where we're not getting in accidents at all, of course. And as you can see, other areas here where we're if you're doing a maneuver like turning, much of these systems are designed for highway use, right? They want to look at the vehicle directly in front of them. Curves and things like this present challenges for today's L2 ADAS systems. So having a system or a sensor that can look sideways depending on wheel direction, things like that, just like headlights are starting to do, seems like a reasonable approach to this problem. So the unique capabilities that Spartan brings to this world, today's ADAS level 2, is acceleration detection. This is a very interesting capability that we've developed. Much of this software heritage comes from aerospace. So if you're flying around in your F-35 fighter, you might want to see something very quickly accelerating towards you. We have the capability to detect acceleration in a single dwell. So that allows for very quick detection of a potentially dangerous situation that we could then guide the ADAS system to do some sort of slowing down or evasive maneuver. When we're applying these software techniques, we also have a process called adaptive resource management. This allows for very kind of optimizing the silicon, either on the edge or in a central processor, to work quickly with our software. So we want to actually reduce latency of a normal radar whilst also increasing that resolution. In moving on to the resolution, we apply a technique called super res. This is essentially a filtering, cleaning process, not a whole lot different from Algalux, but we're doing it on very different data. But we apply our algorithm to the IQ data very early in the processing chain of the radar, clean that up. So then this results in machine learning techniques being performed on standardized, far better data. This has always been a challenge with radar because there is not really an existing IQ model that everybody agrees upon. And typically out of your current tier 1 radar, you're going to get highly filtered data, which isn't exactly what an ADAS developer would want to improve a system. And then these are the kind of situations we look for, right? We spent the beginning of our companies, in business development, really looking for where are those pain points. And we had a list of capabilities that we wanted to go after, but as it turned out, some of those conceptions were a little bit different when we went out to the marketplace. And one of those was range. Initially, we thought about how can we make a 600-meter range LiDAR or radar, sorry. And after bringing that to the market, to trucking companies, to car companies, the typical feedback was, how often in a crowded freeway or road do you have 600 meters range to see in front of you? Is there clear space for that far? It's relatively rare. And if that happens, the situation is probably not that severe because there's a bunch of space in front of the vehicle, whether that's a semi or a truck. So for it to grow business today, it's really about what are the OEMs doing? And I think we're seeing a quick growth in parking lot automation. Tesla's led this charge with capabilities where you can essentially stop in front of a store, the car will go park itself, and vice versa. When you get out of the store, the car will come to you. But the car's got to navigate a relatively complicated situation, a parking lot. So not only do you need path planning of these other things, you got to detect small stuff and moving things. So with radar, you get this combination of very sensitive to movement, so you can see people moving and appearing in a short amount of time. We can leverage our acceleration detection to do this even better. But most of our customers are asking for, sub 1 degree azimuth resolution, below a degree of elevation resolution, so I can detect, identify people and not run into them in these situations. And as well, I'm going to also be detecting cars on the other side of the parking spot that I want to go into. And granted, we're not of the impression that the radar lives in a moat. Our big goal is really to make radar work better with perception suites, camera, LiDAR, ultrasonics, wherever we can. And here's another big dangerous situation that often occurs where that confuses radar. If I have a metal guardrail here, which has a very bright radar cross-section, and a person on a bike, maybe it's carbon fiber or whatever, but it is far less reflective to radar than the guardrail. So separating those objects out in azimuth is really critical. And this is why we really focus on that relatively near range separation of objects, leveraging this very high resolution we can extract out of existing radar. So how does this work? I guess looking at the way LiDAR was designed, it's mechanical. There's a lot of physics involved. There's different approaches with mirrors. Radar is not dissimilar. There's different ways to arrange arrays. I'll get into that in another slide, but the takeaway from this one is, and I kind of equate it to Moore's law. Like, we can only get material, Moore predicts that computing power will constantly grow, but there's a physics limit to that. We need to change silicon as soon as we get to tighter line widths on silicon wafers. So we are chasing higher resolution with existing technologies, and there is really no other way to do that beyond software. So there are losses in the antenna that can be sort of nullified by adding software techniques like super resolution and adaptive resource management to just squeeze more data out of these sensors. So you can basically get to about here, but as soon as the virtual elements thing, and virtual elements equate to channels in a LiDAR sensor, for instance, or pixels in a camera, the expense of having a sensor with 1,000 elements is just untenable. So you got to employ software. And then a little bit on who's out there in the market, and it's growing. It isn't quite hit the clip of where LiDAR was a couple of years ago, but the breadth of technologies here are really interesting. LoonWave uses something called a Lundberg lens. It produces a way to make a relatively small radar that has a very wide azimuth, and you need this. You want to see as wide as you can, and potentially even replace ultrasonic sensors in some cases. But it's not the most efficient, because the only way to increase that resolution is to add more elements within the lens assembly. So you've kind of got a limit there for physics, and there's also gain issues with that sort of setup. Zendar employs SAR, synthetic apertures. These are fantastic for viewing stuff kind of on the sides of the azimuth, but directly on bore sight, there's issues with synthetic aperture in detections. Again, a physics issue. Zadar, another cool company, and they're really doing more classical neural net training on IQ data, which is the more raw LiDAR data or radar data. It's a great technique, but it ends up training on a lot of noise, where if you filtered out the data that you train upon, you'll end up with a better model at the end of the day. So that's our goal, is to really, at the very beginning of that, pre-processing, give them the good data, and it kind of equates to the garbage in, garbage out ethos. Metawave, I was always excited about Metawave, really because it behaved. I was working for Velodyne when Metawave came out, and the idea of steering the energy very quickly makes a lot of sense for detections. And they're able to employ that to guide 5G signals in different directions. So, but it's expensive, and it's got moving parts, and it isn't leveraging the software piece as much as it can. So the expense is typically going to be higher. And then Echodyne I don't really going after automotive directly. They use a metamaterial antenna, but they're certainly focused on a very wide breadth of applications, defense, off-road, where Spartan's a bit more focused on automotive, just because of the scale of the market there. But I guess the other takeaway here is, Spartan can improve upon all of these plays because we're touching the data at an earlier process than really anybody else. And a word about virtual elements. We call this a hyperspace array, and it's a technique that we can utilize to reduce the number of elements to do a single vertical line and a single horizontal line, and then fill in virtually with software all of that kind of square between those two arrays, the vertical and the horizontal. Using this technique, we can sort of emulate up to about 4,800 virtual elements, which then of course results in better resolution. Just like a LiDAR, if I've got 16 channels, it's that resolution. If I've got 128, it's higher. I can squeeze them together. We achieve the same thing, but doing it with software virtually. And the goal is, of course, about a half a degree of azimuth resolution and about a degree of elevation. And then moving on to some kind of capabilities in different situations. So it's funny, when I started with Spartan, I think I always had the idea that radar was completely infallible, could see through snowbanks and things like this. And it can in certain wavelengths, but in automotive, this is kind of 76 to 80 gigahertz. It does have trouble in certain situations. Ice buildup on a radar will render it, certainly reduce the range considerably, and would need to kind of accommodate that situation with some other technology. But I guess we can't expect these cars to perform better in situations where a person would have a hard time driving anyway. So that's always something that resonated with me, is that we're not going to have a superhuman vehicle. We want a vehicle that drives just as good as a person in all the situations that a person can sort of can drive safely in. So of course, sun glare radar could care less about the sun, and of course all the other things, but comparing those different modalities. So, but I guess the big takeaway with radar is it's less expensive. And the other thing we bring to bear is a radar operating system. Of course, we're talking to people about putting the software on a system. You need some hooks in that system to allow it to be adapted to someone else's silicon. So we've created a basic operating system that allows kind of end-to-end extraction of data at every step, as well as helping kind of the resources we deploy work more efficiently. And this is kind of what that looks like. The OS at the bottom, our configuring for a particular array, adapting resources to accommodate that array and the available silicon, applying our algorithms like this. And then what that results in is basically cleaner point cloud data for your machine learning or deep learning models. And really the big goal here is to create a standardized data sets or standardized radar data that everyone can train on. So we put Spartan on everybody's radar, provide this lower level data for training that's a lot richer than that filtered data that you're going to get out of a modern tier 1 radar. And it just creates a situation where we can start integrating radar more deeply into perception suites. And here's a little example of what that looks like. Radar data, of course, isn't humanly recognizable, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. So in this situation, we're applying our super res between the top image and the bottom image. And these are based on TI Cascade Radar's data. The first thing we do is apply super res, which eliminates the noise considerably. And these interesting red lines you're seeing are really the reflections of the vehicle's brake lights. The most reflective thing to a radar is a metal cone or a trihedral. Even the bottom side of a Coke can is also quite reflective. And the inside of a brake light has a little metal shiny reflector to make the brake light visible. We can detect those very easily with radar in this mode and separate them and get the width extent of the vehicle, which is very important, especially when you have side lobes that might make it look like it's wider. You have to kind of squeeze it in so it aligns with what the camera is telling us in the LiDAR. The very bottom one, what we've done here is we're doing the same observation with a fraction of the elements. So we've applied super res to the full array, then we remove most of the elements, and we still achieve a reasonable image that these could be determined to be a car and a person by machine learning. So what this does is then produce a bunch of cost savings potentially to provide similar performance on a sensor that is then less expensive to manufacture. It has less elements. It's probably less things to fail too as well. So that's kind of how we fit. I think I've probably run up all my time there, Mike. So
yeah, Cameron, nice talk. You're 20 minutes now, so we're a few minutes after the. we're a few minutes past the time limit here, so.
Yeah, good. Well, if there are other questions, you guys can reach out to me on the chat. I will put up my information here, my email. California based, but we're certainly international. So if those of you overseas, we'd love to chat. And if you're building radar, making radar chips, we'd love to see if we can improve your data.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, Cameron, thank you very much for a nice talk. Let's just do one question really quick. This is from Daniel Murati. Thank you for sharing an interesting introduction from Spartan Radar. Are you based on a 4-chip configuration only?
We're not, no. So we can work with basically any array in any chipset, and we do. We've done implementations with Under, if you're familiar with them, working with other large tier ones. So we can optimize the software to really work with any configuration of radar.
All right, very good, Daniel. Very good. Thank you for that question. And Cameron, again, very nice talk. Congrats on all the traction and success you guys are seeing. I really appreciate you joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Always a pleasure, Mike. Thanks for the opportunity.